Why fools always think they're wise. Socrates' harsh truth. Let me ask you something that might sting a little. What if the confidence with which you live your life is the very thing keeping you from wisdom? What if the more certain you are about your opinions, your decisions, your worldview, the more you might actually be lost? That's not just a provocative question. That's the core of one of the most uncomfortable truths Socrates ever offered humanity. He didn't say it gently. He didn't cushion it with politeness. He said it so clearly, so relentlessly, that he was sentenced to death for it. He said, "The only true wisdom is in knowing you know nothing." And if that sentence doesn't shake you, you're probably the very person Socrates was trying to reach. Let's zoom in. Why do fools always think they're wise? Why do people with the least understanding often speak the loudest, argue the hardest, and believe the most strongly? It's because they don't know what they don't know. That's the tragedy. The fool walks into a room and assumes he sees everything. He doesn't feel the edges of his knowledge because he's never explored far enough to hit them. But the wise person, the truly wise person, has traveled so far into the unknown that they're painfully aware of how vast the unknown truly is. They've questioned themselves so often that doubt becomes a companion, not an enemy. And in that doubt, they find clarity. They find humility. They find truth.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
Now, let's make this real. Think about someone in your life who's always sure of themselves. Maybe they dominate conversations. Maybe they never admit when they're wrong. Maybe they even sound intelligent, throwing around facts, theories, or half-digested ideas from books or social media. But if you listen closely, you'll notice something. They're rarely asking questions. They're not truly curious. They've already concluded how the world works. And if you present something that challenges their view, they don't explore it, they reject it. That is not wisdom. That is ego dressed up in intellectual clothing. This isn't just about other people, though. But if we're honest, this is about you. It's about me. It's about the part of us that wants to be right more than we want to be real. It's about the part of us that pretends to understand just to avoid the discomfort of admitting we don't. Socrates didn't walk around calling people foolish because he thought he was better than them. He did it because he saw, over and over, that people were living under a dangerous illusion, the illusion of knowledge. He went to the politicians, the poets, the craftsmen the people's society admired, and he asked them questions, not to trap them, but to reveal something. And time after time, they couldn't explain the foundations of their beliefs. They didn't understand what they claimed to know. And when Socrates pointed it out, they got angry. They didn't want truth. They wanted reputation, control, certainty. But here's the twist. Socrates wasn't claiming he had the answers. That's what made him different. He said, "I know that I know nothing." That's where his wisdom came from, not from knowledge, but from awareness of ignorance. And this is where the harsh truth hits home. You cannot become wise until you become willing to look foolish. Let me say that again. You cannot grow in wisdom until you're willing to admit how much you don't know. Until you're willing to be the one in the room who says, "I don't understand. Can you explain?" Until you stop performing intelligence and start pursuing truth. This principle isn't just intellectual, it's practical. Think about your relationships. How often have arguments escalated not because someone was wrong, but because no one was willing to say, "Maybe I don't fully understand what you're saying"? How many opportunities have you missed because you assumed you already knew what was best? How many mistakes have you repeated because you didn't pause to question your assumptions? Let's get even more personal. Have you ever found yourself defending a belief just because it's yours? Not because you explored it, tested it, verified it, but because it's part of your identity. That's the ego at work. And ego is the enemy of wisdom, because wisdom requires unlearning. It requires you to challenge the very structure of your mind, and most of us aren't ready for that. Most of us would rather be comfortable in illusion than uncomfortable in discovery. But that's not how transformation happens. That's not how you grow. Real growth begins when you start to question your own mind with the same intensity that you question the world. When you stop assuming that your experiences have given you a complete map of reality. When you realize that every belief you hold is a hypothesis waiting to be tested. That's what Socrates did. He didn't just question others, he lived in the question. He built a life around doubt, and in that doubt he found something deeper than certainty. He found understanding, and guess what? The world around you is rigged to keep you from doing that. Social media rewards certainty. Soundbites, hot takes, instant opinions. Nobody gets attention for saying, "I don't know." But that's exactly what we need more of. We need more people willing to pause, to reflect, to admit ignorance. Because only then can we begin to see clearly. So here's the most important question I can ask you right now. Are you brave enough to question what you think you know? Not just intellectually, but emotionally. Can you sit with the discomfort of not having an answer? Can you resist the urge to fill silence with noise? Can you, like Socrates, trade the illusion of wisdom for the real thing, even if it costs you your pride? Because if you can, something extraordinary will begin to happen. You'll start to see the world and yourself with fresh eyes. You'll stop trying to win arguments and start seeking insight. You'll stop needing to be right and start wanting to be free. And that is the beginning of true wisdom. The price of pretending, how our fear of looking stupid keeps us stuck. Let's be honest. We're all afraid of looking stupid. It's one of the deepest, most primal fears that follows us from childhood into adulthood like a persistent shadow. It shows up in classrooms, meetings, relationships, even in our private thoughts. And because of that fear, we pretend. We nod when we don't understand. We agree when we're unsure. We stay silent when we should speak. And slowly, without realizing it, we trade the possibility of wisdom for the comfort of appearance. We don't want to look foolish, so we act like we know. But here's the philosophical tragedy. The moment you pretend to know, you've locked the door to ever actually knowing. Let me say something that might feel uncomfortably true. Most people don't want to be wise, they want to be seen as wise. They want the image, the identity, the respect that comes with being the smart one, the insightful one, the enlightened one. But they don't want the price. And the price is vulnerability. The price is humility. The price is being wrong publicly, frequently, and without defensiveness. Socrates wasn't revered because he had all the answers. He was revered because he kept showing people how little they actually understood. Not as a way to humiliate them, but to liberate them. To say, look, this thing you're clinging to, this belief, this opinion, this certainty, it might not be what you think it is. And that's okay, because now we can explore the truth together. But that's terrifying, isn't it? Because to admit you don't know is to admit you're exposed. It's to risk judgment, rejection, even ridicule. And we've been conditioned to believe that not knowing makes us less valuable, less capable, less worthy. So we develop strategies. We bluff, we deflect, we memorize talking points without understanding the ideas behind them. We attach ourselves to ideologies so we can sound smart without actually thinking. And slowly we become actors in a play where everyone is pretending to know, and no one is actually learning. This is why you can walk into a meeting full of professionals, or a university full of scholars, or a family dinner full of opinions, and still find very little wisdom. Because the fear of looking stupid runs deeper than the desire to discover truth. And until that changes, we remain stuck, not because we lack intelligence, but because we lack courage. The courage to say, wait, I don't understand. The courage to ask, what if I'm wrong? The courage to admit, I need help. Those moments feel like weakness, but they are the beginning of real strength. Think about your own life. How many opportunities have you missed because you were afraid to raise your hand? How many relationships have suffered because you didn't ask the hard questions, or admit you were confused, or say what you really felt? How many beliefs have you held on to not because they made sense, but because they were comfortable, familiar, easy to defend? That's the price of pretending. You trade growth for performance. You trade truth for ego. And you stay stuck in a life that feels impressive on the outside, but hollow on the inside. Here's the shift. What if not knowing is not a flaw? What if it's a gift? What if every moment of confusion is actually an invitation to step into deeper understanding? What if the real fool is not the one who admits they don't know, but the one who never questions what they think they do? Socrates knew this. That's why he spent his life asking questions that challenged the very foundations of society. He wasn't trying to tear people down, he was trying to wake them up and to say, you've built your life on unexamined assumptions, and until you examine them, you're living in a dream. So I'll ask you something bold. What are you pretending to know right now? Is it your purpose, your beliefs, your political opinions, your role in your family or workplace? What if you paused just for a moment and let all of that go? What if you allowed yourself to be seen not as the expert, not as the strong one, not as the person with the answers, but as someone who is still learning, still wondering, still human? Because here's the truth, pretending may protect your image, but it will never lead you to wisdom. Only honesty can do that. Raw, vulnerable, uncomfortable honesty. The kind that says, I don't know, but I want to. That's where learning begins. That's where growth happens. That's where transformation starts. And maybe, just maybe, that's what Socrates meant all along. That wisdom isn't about having the right answers. It's about having the right questions and the courage to ask them, no matter how foolish you might look in the process. The illusion of intelligence, why smart people stay trapped in shallow thinking. We live in a world that worships intelligence. Test scores, academic credentials, IQ, articulate speech, they're all treated as evidence of a superior mind. And yet, if we look closer, something troubling emerges. Some of the most intelligent people are also the most blind. Not because they lack brain power, but because they're trapped in the illusion of intelligence. They've confused the ability to process information quickly with the capacity to understand reality deeply. And that confusion is dangerous. It creates a kind of intellectual arrogance that's harder to detect than ignorance. Because unlike the fool who obviously doesn't know, the smart person can sound right while still being completely wrong. Let's break it down. Intelligence, as we usually define it, is about mental speed, memory, and pattern recognition. It's the ability to draw conclusions, solve problems, and articulate ideas, often impressively so. But wisdom is something else entirely. Wisdom is slower. It's quieter. It's not about how fast you can think, but how deeply you can reflect. It's not about how much you know, but how much you question what you know. And here's the harsh truth. Many smart people never develop wisdom because they don't think they need to. They're so good at winning arguments, proving points, and dazzling others with their intellect that they never stop to ask, am I actually seeing the truth? Or am I just performing intelligence? This is where Socrates becomes our guide again. He encountered the so-called wise men of Athens, people regarded as the intellectual elite. But when he asked them simple, probing questions, they couldn't explain their beliefs. They crumbled under examination, and yet they were certain they understood. Their intelligence had become a trap, because they could dress their ignorance in complex language. They could mask their confusion with confidence. And worst of all, they believed their own performance. This is the illusion of intelligence. It convinces you that your conclusions are valid simply because they are well articulated. It tells you that your beliefs are sound because they're supported by data or logic or history. But intelligence without humility is just ego in disguise. It doesn't want to learn, it wants to win. It doesn't want truth, it wants dominance. And that's why some of the smartest people stay stuck in shallow thinking. They don't question their foundations. They don't examine their assumptions. They build towers of reason on sand and then mock others for not climbing as high. Let me ask you something uncomfortable. Have you ever used your intelligence to avoid facing something real? Have you ever argued your way out of admitting you were wrong? Have you ever used logic to suppress emotion or knowledge to avoid vulnerability? That's not insight. That's defense. And the smarter you are, the more sophisticated your defenses become. You stop listening. You start intellectualizing everything. You reduce people to arguments and life to a debate. But life isn't a debate. It's an unfolding mystery. And the goal isn't to dominate it, it's to understand it, to live it, to be transformed by it. Here's the paradox. The more intelligent you are, the more dangerous your thinking becomes if it's not grounded in self-awareness. Because you'll find ways to justify anything. You'll win arguments even when you're wrong. And worst of all, you'll stop growing. Because growth doesn't come from being right. It comes from being willing to be wrong. It comes from curiosity, humility, and the courage to sit with uncertainty. So what's the solution? It's not to abandon intelligence, it's to balance it, to pair it with reflection, to use your intellect not as a weapon, but as a lens that helps you see more clearly, not just what's outside you, but what's within you. That's what Socrates did. He didn't just challenge others, he challenged himself. Constantly, relentlessly. He didn't trust his own mind blindly. He poked it. He prodded it. He asked himself over and over, do I really know what I think I know? And that's the question we all need to ask. Because intelligence can give you answers. But only wisdom can tell you which questions are worth asking in the first place. Intelligence can help you build a life. But only wisdom can help you build a meaningful one. Intelligence can impress others. But wisdom will humble you, and in that humility, you'll finally be able to see clearly. So, before you trust your own cleverness too much, pause. Reflect. Ask yourself, am I using my mind to explore truth or to protect my ego? Because if it's the latter, then no matter how smart you are, you're still living in the dark. Wisdom begins where certainty ends, how doubt opens the door to truth. Doubt. It's a word we're taught to fear. In school, doubt is weakness. In religion, it's heresy. In politics, it's betrayal. And in everyday life, it's often seen as indecision or a lack of confidence. But what if doubt isn't the enemy of truth, but its doorway? What if certainty is the real danger? What if wisdom doesn't begin with answers, but with the courage to question everything you think you know? Socrates understood this better than anyone, but he didn't claim to possess wisdom like a treasure to be hoarded. Instead, he walked the streets of Athens asking questions not to disprove others for the sake of pride, but to uncover a deeper truth hiding beneath assumptions. And when the oracle at Delphi declared that no one was wiser than Socrates, he didn't celebrate. He investigated. He tested the statement by searching for anyone who truly understood what they claimed to. And what he found horrified him. The people who were most certain were the least examined, the most confident, the most blind. Doubt, on the other hand, is uncomfortable. It's raw. It can feel like standing on shifting ground. But in that discomfort lies the seed of transformation. Because when you doubt, you open yourself. You create space for something new to enter. You allow your mind to be reshaped by reality rather than forcing reality to fit inside your mind. That is the beginning of wisdom, not knowing something, but being willing to unknow what you thought was true. Let's make this personal. Think about a belief you've held for years. Maybe it's about success or love or morality or even yourself. Ask yourself, where did this belief come from? Have I ever questioned it? Have I ever truly tested it in the real world? Or have I just accepted it because it's familiar, because it makes me feel secure, because it's what everyone around me thinks? These questions are not easy. They're not meant to be. They're meant to shake the foundations. Because that's what real growth requires, not the rearranging of furniture, but the tearing down of walls. This is why doubt is not weakness. It's strength. It's the strength to say, maybe I don't know. It's the mental flexibility to explore new perspectives without collapsing into confusion. It's the emotional maturity to hold contradictory ideas in your mind and allow them to dance rather than fight. That's how insight happens. That's how wisdom is born, not in the stillness of certainty, but in the movement of curiosity. But we have to retrain ourselves. We have to unlearn the cultural conditioning that tells us to always appear confident, always have answers, always know what's right. Because that kind of false certainty is a mask, and the longer we wear it, the more we forget who we are underneath. Socrates didn't wear a mask. He wore his ignorance like a badge of honor, not because he celebrated being uninformed, but because he understood that the path to truth starts with humility. So the next time you feel doubt rising, don't suppress it. Don't silence it. Lean into it. Let it guide you. Let it ask the hard questions. Let it strip away the illusions. Because only when the mind is open can the truth enter, and only when certainty dies can wisdom begin. And maybe that's the final irony. The fool clings to certainty and calls it strength. The wise embrace doubt and find in it the only thing that was ever truly worth knowing, the truth that we are all still learning.